At 39 years old, seven-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton thought he had given his father everything. A comfortable house, financial security, the freedom to enjoy retirement after decades of sacrifice. Anthony Hamilton had worked 3 jobs when Lewis was 8, scraping together money for go-kart racing so his son could chase an impossible dream. But when a neighbor's text message shatters Lewis's peaceful morning in Monaco, everything changes. His 65-year-old father is working 2 jobs again, exhausting himself for reasons Lewis can't understand. The same man who had sacrificed everything for Lewis's success is mysteriously pushing himself to the limit once more. What Lewis discovers when he rushes home to Stevenage will challenge everything he thought he knew about success, legacy, and what it truly means to be a champion. His father's secret will not only change Lewis's life forever, it will inspire millions around the world and transform the future of motorsport itself. Some discoveries change a person, others change the world. This is the story of both Lewis. Hamilton sat in his Monaco apartment, staring out at the sparkling blue Mediterranean Sea. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the water, and luxury yachts bobbed gently in the harbor below. It was March 15th, 2024, and he had just finished his daily workout in his private GYM. 39 years old, Lewis was still at the top of his game. 7 Formula One World Championships sat on the shelf behind him, gleaming in the morning light. His body was in peak condition, his mind sharp as ever. The upcoming season promised to be another exciting chapter in his legendary career. He picked up his protein shake and walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Down below, tourists were already gathering along the harbor, cameras ready to catch a glimpse of the famous drivers who called Monaco home. Lewis smiled slightly. He remembered when he used to be one of those wide-eyed fans, dreaming of living in a place like this. His phone buzzed on the marble counter. Lewis glanced at it, expecting another message from his trainer or maybe his team at Mercedes. Instead, he saw a name that made him pause: Mrs. Chun. Mrs. Chun lived next door to his father Anthony in Stevenage, the small English town where Lewis had grown up. She was a kind, elderly woman who had moved to England from Hong Kong decades ago. She always waved when Lewis visited his dad, and she made the best dumplings Lewis had ever tasted. But Mrs. Chun had never texted him before. Lewis picked up his phone and read the message. His smile disappeared instantly. "Lewis, I think you should." "No. I saw your dad leaving for his second job again yesterday. He looked so tired. Maybe you should call him." Lewis read the message 3 times, his heart sinking deeper with each word. Second job? His father, Anthony Hamilton, was 65 years old. He should be enjoying retirement, maybe taking trips or working in his garden. Lewis had made sure of that. Years ago, when Lewis signed his first big contract with McLaren, the very first thing he did was pay off his father's mortgage. When he won his first championship, he set up a trust fund that would ensure Anthony never had to worry about money again. When Mercedes offered him his massive deal, he bought his father a comfortable house and told him to quit working forever. "You've done enough, Dad," Lewis had said that day. "You worked 3 jobs when I was a kid just so I could race go-karts. Now it's time for you to rest." Anthony had hugged him then, tears in his eyes. "I'm so proud of you, son. Not for the money or the fame, but for remembering where you came from." So why would his 65-year-old father be working 2 jobs now? Lewis's hands shook slightly as he scrolled through his contacts to find his father's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Lewis could picture Anthony's old Nokia phone buzzing on the kitchen counter of the modest house in Stevenage. "Lewis," Anthony's voice came through the speaker, warm but tired. "Good to hear from you, son. How's training going for the new season?" Even through the phone, Lewis could hear something in his father's voice that worried him. Anthony sounded exhausted, like he was trying to hide how tired he really was. "Dad, Mrs. Chin texted me. She says you're working 2 jobs again. What's going on?" There was a long pause. Lewis could hear traffic in the background, the distant sound of cars and buses. Anthony wasn't at home. He was somewhere outside, probably on his way to or from work. "It's nothing, Lewis," Anthony finally said, but his voice wasn't convincing. "Just keeping busy, you know? A man needs purpose. Can't just sit around the house all day watching television." "Dad, you don't need to work. I've given you enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You should be enjoying yourself, maybe traveling or Lewis, son, I appreciate everything you've done for me. You know I do. But I'm fine. Really, just staying active. But Lewis knew his father's voice better than anyone in the world. He could hear the exhaustion, the weight of something Anthony wasn't telling him. This was the same voice his father had used when Lewis was 8 years old and Anthony was working 3 jobs to pay for go-kart racing. The voice of a man pushing himself beyond his limits. Dad, I'm coming home. We need to talk face to face. No, Lewis, you don't need to do that. You have the Bahrain Grand Prix coming up in 2 weeks. You need to focus on your racing, not worry about your old man. Lewis stood up and started pacing his apartment. Through the windows, he could see other apartment buildings where his fellow drivers lived. Max Verstappen was probably 3 buildings over, preparing for the season. Charles Leclerc was likely having breakfast with his family. Normal, wealthy people doing normal, wealthy people things. But Lewis's mind was racing back 30 years to a small terraced house in Stevenage, where an 8-year-old boy dreamed of being a racing driver while his father worked himself to exhaustion to make those dreams possible. Dad, something's wrong. I can hear it in your voice. Please, just tell me what's going on. Another long pause. Lewis could hear Anthony breathing heavily, like he was walking upstairs or carrying something heavy. Lewis, I have to go. I'm at work and they need me. We'll talk soon, okay? Focus on your racing. Make me proud like you always do. The line went dead. Lewis stared at his phone, feeling sick to his stomach. His father had hung up on him. Anthony Hamilton, who had never missed a single one of Lewis's races as a child, who had driven hundreds of miles just to watch 5-minute go-kart competitions, who had sacrificed everything for his son's dreams. That man had just hung up. Rather than explain why he was working 2 jobs at age 65, Lewis walked back to the window and looked out at the Mediterranean. The beautiful view that usually calmed him now felt like a prison. Here he was, living in luxury, while his father was somewhere in Stevenage, exhausted and working jobs he shouldn't need. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Mrs. Chun. Lewis grabbed the phone eagerly, hoping for more information. But what he read made his breath catch in his throat. There's something else you should know about your father, Lewis. But I think you need to see it for yourself. Some things can't be explained in a text message. Lewis immediately called his assistant. Book me the next flight to London. Cancel everything for the next few days. But Lewis, you have simulator time scheduled, and the team wants to review. Cancel it all. I need to go home. As Lewis threw clothes into a suitcase, his mind raced with questions. What could Mrs. Chin mean? What was his father hiding? And why did Lewis suddenly feel like that 8-year-old boy again, worried about his dad working too hard? One thing was certain. Lewis wasn't going to rest until he found out what was really going on in Stevenage. His father had spent decades putting Lewis's dreams first. Now it was Lewis's turn to put his father first, no matter what he discovered. The flight to London couldn't come fast enough. Lewis sat in first class, staring out the airplane window at the clouds below. His leg bounced nervously as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The other passengers probably thought he was just another wealthy traveler, but inside, Lewis felt like a worried son who needed to get home. 3 hours later, he was driving through the familiar streets of Stevenage in a rental car. The town looked smaller than he remembered, like someone had shrunk all the buildings while he was away. But the memories came flooding back with every turn. There was the corner shop where his dad would buy him chocolate bars after karting practice. On Sundays, the owner, Mr. Patel, always asked about Lewis's races and kept newspaper clippings about his wins on the wall. There was the park where they would kick a football when Lewis needed a break from thinking about racing lines and lap times. Lewis turned onto Pear Tree Way, the street where he had grown up. The houses were small and close together, with tiny front gardens and narrow driveways. It was nothing like the grand boulevards of Monaco, but it felt more like home than any mansion ever could. He pulled up outside his father's house. It was the same modest terraced house where Lewis had lived until he was 18. Anthony could easily afford something much bigger and fancier now, but he always said he didn't need more space or fancy things. This house holds all our best memories, he would tell Lewis. Why would I want to leave them behind? Lewis sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house. The red front door needed a fresh coat of paint, and the small garden was perfectly maintained. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. So why did Lewis feel like something was terribly wrong? Lewis, Oh my goodness, Lewis Hamilton. Lewis turned to see Mrs. Chun waving from her garden next door. She was a small woman in her 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She was wearing gardening gloves and holding a small watering can. Mrs. Chun. Lewis got out of the car and walked over to her. Thank you for texting me. I came as soon as I could. Her face became serious. I'm so glad you came, Lewis. Your father is a proud man. Too proud sometimes. He didn't want you to know what's been happening. Know what? Please, Mrs. Chun, I'm really worried about him. She looked around, as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. Then she set down her watering can and walked toward him. Follow me, Lewis. But be quiet. If your father sees us, he might get upset. Mrs. Chun led him around to the back of Anthony's house. Lewis had played in this small backyard thousands of times as a child. He remembered kicking balls against the fence and pretending he was scoring goals at Wembley Stadium. But now he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. The small garage, which used to hold garden tools and old bicycles, had been completely transformed. Through the window, Lewis could see workbenches, tools, and what looked like go-kart parts scattered everywhere. A hand-painted sign hung on the door, Hamilton Racing Academy, free lessons for local kids. Lewis felt his knees go weak. Mrs. Chun, what is this? Your father has been teaching children from the neighborhood how to race go-karts. Every Saturday and Sunday for the past 2 years. 20 kids so far, all from families who can't afford proper racing lessons. Lewis pushed open the garage door, his hands shaking. Inside, it looked like a miniature version of a professional racing workshop. There were small engines on the workbenches, helmets hanging on hooks, and tools organized neatly on pegboards. But what really caught Lewis's attention were the photographs covering every wall. Pictures of local children, all minorities, sitting in go-karts with huge smiles on their faces. Some kids looked as young as 6 years old. Others were teenagers. All of them wore expressions of pure joy. The same look Lewis remembered having when he first started racing. On one wall, there was a bulletin board covered with thank you letters from parents. Lewis walked closer and began reading them, his eyes filling with tears. Mr. Hamilton, thank you for teaching my daughter Maya. She is the only black girl at her school who's interested in racing. Before she met you, she didn't think girls like her could be race car drivers. Now she talks about being the next Lewis Hamilton. We could never afford these lessons without your help. Another letter read, Dear Mr. Hamilton, my son Jamal has been a different kid since he started coming to your garage. He was shy and didn't have many friends. Now he talks nonstop about racing and has made friends with all the other kids in the program. You've given him confidence I never thought he would have. Lewis picked up another letter. Mr. Hamilton, our family came to England from Somalia 5 years ago. My daughter Aisha didn't speak much English and had trouble fitting in at school. Racing has given her something to be excited about and a way to make friends. Thank you for believing in her. Lewis had to sit down on a nearby stool. His father had been working 2 jobs not for himself, but to fund free racing lessons for kids who reminded him of Lewis at that age. Mrs. Chun appeared beside him. He works at Henderson's Auto Parts during the day, stocking shelves and helping customers. Then he cleans offices downtown 3 nights a week. Every penny he earns goes into buying equipment and maintaining the go-karts for these children. Why didn't he tell me? Lewis's voice came out as barely a whisper. Because he knows you, Lewis. He knows you would want to write a big check and solve everything with money. But this isn't about money. This is about Anthony Hamilton making sure other children get the same chance he gave you when you were 8 years old. Lewis looked around the garage again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just a hobby or a way to stay busy. This was his father's life's work, continued in a different form. How many kids has he taught? 20 so far. Some have moved on to proper racing schools. Others just come for the joy of it. But all of them love your father like he's their own grandfather. Lewis stood up and walked to a corner of the garage where several small trophies sat on a shelf. He picked one up and read the inscription, Maya Chun, first place, Hertfordshire Youth Karting Championship. Below that, in smaller letters, trained by Anthony Hamilton. Mrs. Chun, is Maya your? My granddaughter, yes. Your father has been teaching her for a year now. She's quite good, actually. Reminds me of someone else I used to know. Mrs. Chun smiled gently. Just then, Lewis heard voices outside. Children's voices, laughing and talking excitedly. Oh no, Mrs. Chen whispered. It's Saturday morning. The kids are here for their lesson. Lewis looked around frantically. What do I do? I don't want to disrupt anything, but I need to see this. Hide behind those shelves. Mrs. Chen pointed to a corner where larger equipment was stored. Watch and listen. You'll understand everything. Lewis crouched behind a set of metal shelving just as the garage door opened fully. 8 children, aged between 6 and 12, walked in with Anthony. Lewis's heart swelled as he watched his father transform before his eyes. The tired, exhausted man who had sounded so weary on the phone became animated and joyful around these kids. His voice was strong and enthusiastic as he greeted each child by name. Good morning, racers. Who can tell me the most important rule of racing? A small girl with curly hair and bright eyes raised her hand immediately. Safety first, Mr. Hamilton. That's right, Maya. And what do we always remember when things get difficult? All the children shouted together, their voices echoing in the small garage. Hamiltons never give up. Lewis had to cover his mouth to keep from making a sound. These children didn't know they were learning from the father of a 7-time world champion. To them, Anthony Hamilton was simply a kind man who believed in their dreams and taught them that anything was possible. From his hiding spot behind the metal shelves, Lewis watched his father move around the garage with energy he hadn't seen in years. Anthony's face was bright and animated as he began the morning lesson. Right then, racers, Anthony said, clapping his hands together. Before we get to the fun stuff, let's review our basics. Maya, can you show the new students how to check tire pressure? The small girl with curly hair stepped forward confidently. Lewis recognized her immediately from Mrs. Chen's description. This was Maya, Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, the girl who dreamed of being the next Lewis Hamilton. Maya picked up a tire gauge and knelt beside one of the small go-karts. First, you take off the valve cap, she explained to the other children. Then you press the gauge firmly against the valve stem. The number tells you if there's enough air in the tire. Excellent. Anthony beamed with pride. And why is tire pressure important, Jamal? A boy who looked about 10 years old raised his hand. Because if the tires don't have enough air, the cart won't handle properly. And if they have too much air, they might not grip the track well. Lewis felt his chest tighten with emotion. These children were learning the same basic lessons Anthony had taught him 30 years ago. The same patient explanations, the same careful attention to safety, the same building of confidence through knowledge. Anthony moved to a workbench where several small engines were displayed. Today we're going to learn about how engines work. Who can tell me what makes a go-kart move forward? A girl who looked about 8 years old raised her hand shyly. The engine? That's right, Aisha. But how does the engine make the cart move? Anthony began explaining how fuel and air mix together, how spark plugs create explosions, and how those explosions turn the wheels. Lewis watched the children's faces as they listened. Their eyes were wide with fascination, just like his had been when his father first explained these concepts to him. But it was more than just technical knowledge Anthony was sharing. Between each lesson, he wove in stories about perseverance, respect, and believing in yourself. You know, Anthony said as he showed them how to check brake fluid. When my son Lewis was your age, he thought racing was just about going fast. But I taught him that real racing is about making smart decisions, treating other drivers with respect, and never giving up when things get difficult. A boy named Connor, who couldn't have been older than 7, raised his hand. Mr. Hamilton, do you think we could really become race car drivers like Lewis Hamilton? Anthony's face grew serious, and he knelt down to Connor's eye level. Connor, let me tell you something important. Every single person who ever achieved something great started exactly where you are right now, as a child with a dream. The only difference between dreamers and achievers is that achievers never stop working toward their goals. Lewis felt tears building in his eyes. This was the same conversation Anthony had had with him when he was Connor's age, worried that kids from Stevenage didn't become Formula One drivers. But more important than becoming famous, Anthony continued, is becoming a good person who helps others. That's what real success looks like. The lesson continued for another hour. Lewis watched his 65-year-old father get down on his knees to help children understand carburetors. He saw Anthony patiently answer the same question 3 times when a shy student didn't understand at first. He witnessed his father's genuine delight when each child successfully completed a task. When Jamal struggled with a wrench that was too big for his hands, Anthony didn't just fix it for him. Instead, he found a smaller tool and showed Jamal how to use proper technique. "I'm not good at this," Jamal said, frustrated after dropping the wrench twice. Anthony sat down beside him. "Do you know what happened the first time my son Lewis tried to change spark plugs?" "What?" "He dropped the socket wrench into the engine compartment, and it took us 20 minutes to fish it out. Then he stripped the threads on the spark plug because he was trying too hard." The children giggled, and Jamal smiled. "But you know what Lewis did? He asked me to show him again, and again, and again, until he got it right. That's what made him special. Not that he never made mistakes, but that he never let mistakes stop him from trying." Lewis remembered that day clearly. He had been 8 years old and so frustrated with himself. But his father's patience and encouragement had turned a moment of failure into a lesson about persistence. As the morning progressed, Lewis began to understand something profound. His father wasn't just teaching these children about go-kart racing. He was giving them the same foundation of confidence, knowledge, and character that had shaped Lewis into the man he became. When the formal lesson ended, the children didn't rush to leave. Instead, they gathered around Anthony, asking questions and sharing stories from their week. Maya told him about a school presentation she had given about racing. Aisha showed him a drawing she had made of herself driving a Formula One car. Connor asked if they could practice more next week because he wanted to get better at changing tires. Lewis watched his father with each child, giving them individual attention and encouragement. This wasn't just a group lesson. Anthony was building personal relationships with each young person, just as he had done with Lewis. Finally, the children began to leave. But before they went, each one hugged Anthony goodbye. Lewis saw the genuine affection in their faces and the way his father's eyes lit up with each hug. "Same time next week, Mr. Hamilton?" Maya asked as she headed toward the door. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. Keep practicing your racing lines. And remember what we talked about: smooth inputs, look ahead, and never brake in the middle of a corner." When the last child left, Anthony sat down heavily on a stool. Lewis could see how much the morning had taken out of his aging father. But Anthony's face glowed with happiness and satisfaction. Lewis waited until he was sure all the children were gone, then stepped out from behind the shelves. Anthony froze when he saw his son. For a moment, neither man spoke. The garage suddenly felt very quiet. "How long have you been there?" Anthony asked quietly. "Long enough, Dad. Long enough to understand." Anthony's face showed a mix of emotions: surprise, embarrassment, and something that looked like fear. "You're going to tell me to stop this, aren't you?" Anthony said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to say I'm too old, that I should just take your money and retire to a nice quiet life." "But Lewis, these kids, they need someone to believe in them." Lewis looked around the garage, seeing it with completely new eyes. This wasn't just a hobby or a way for his father to stay busy. This was Anthony Hamilton's way of continuing the work he had started with Lewis, giving children from ordinary backgrounds extraordinary opportunities. "Dad," Lewis said softly, "I'm not here to stop anything. I'm here because I was worried about you. But now I think I understand what you're really doing." Father and son walked out of the garage and sat on the front steps of the house where Lewis had grown up. The March air was crisp, and Lewis could see his breath as he struggled to find the right words. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of children playing in a nearby park. Anthony looked older than Lewis remembered, his hair completely gray now, lines around his eyes deeper than before. But there was something else in his father's expression, a sense of purpose Lewis hadn't seen since his own racing career had taken off. "Dad, I'm not angry. I'm just confused. You're 65 years old, working 2 jobs, and you look exhausted every time I talk to you. I've given you enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Why are you doing this to yourself?" Anthony was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and thoughtful. "Lewis, do you remember when you were 8 years old and we couldn't afford new tires for your go-kart?" Lewis nodded slowly. "Of course. It was right before the regional championship race. And do you remember what I did? You worked extra shifts at the railway company for 2 weeks straight. Double shifts on weekends. You barely slept." "That's right. And do you remember what you said to me when you finally got those new tires?" Lewis thought back to that moment. He could picture his 8-year-old self, jumping up and down with excitement as his father mounted the fresh tires on his cart. I said I would pay you back someday when I became a famous race car driver. Exactly. Anthony smiled at the memory. You promised you would take care of me when you made it big. And you know what, son? You kept that promise. You paid me back more than I ever dreamed possible. Anthony turned to look at Louis directly. But there's something you need to understand, Louis. Those weren't the happiest moments of my life because of the money I earned working those extra shifts. They were the happiest moments because I was helping my son chase his dreams. Louis felt a lump forming in his throat. Every extra hour I worked, every sacrifice your mother and I made, every penny we scraped together for entry fees and equipment. It all had meaning because I was giving you a chance to become something special. Anthony stood up and paced a little on the small front path. When you became successful, when you started winning championships and earning millions, I was the proudest father in the world. But I also felt lost. Lost, Louis, my purpose for 30 years had been helping you reach your dreams. I got up every morning knowing that my work meant you could keep racing. When you didn't need my help anymore, when you could buy and sell everything I'd ever owned. What was I supposed to do? Louis had never thought about it this way. Dad, you could just enjoy life. Travel, relax, spend time with friends. Enjoy what, Louis? Sitting in that fancy house you bought me, watching television all day, taking expensive trips to places where I don't know anyone? That's not living, son. That's just existing. Anthony sat back down beside Louis. 2 years ago, I was at the grocery store, and I met a woman named Sarah. She recognized my last name and asked if I was related to you. We got talking, and she mentioned that her daughter Maya loved racing, but they couldn't afford lessons. Louis remembered Maya from the garage lesson, the confident girl with curly hair who knew all about tire pressure. That night, I couldn't sleep, Anthony continued. I kept thinking about that little girl and about all the kids in Stevenage, who might have the same dreams you had, but no chance to chase them. Kids whose parents work just as hard as I did, but can't afford to give their children opportunities. Louis began to understand. So you started teaching Maya. I started with just her. Brought one of your old go-karts down from the attic, fixed it up, and taught her basic driving in the car park behind the community center. But word spread. More kids came. Their parents were just like your mother and me when you were young. Working hard, loving their children, but struggling to give them chances. Anthony's voice grew stronger as he talked about the children. Louis, in 2 years, I've taught 47 children to drive go-karts. 3 of them have won races at local tracks. Maya just got accepted to a youth racing program in London because of the skills she learned in my garage. And last month, Jamal's teacher called his mother to say his grades had improved dramatically because racing gave him confidence and something to be proud of. Louis watched his father's face light up as he talked about each child. But more than the racing, I'm teaching them what you learned. That where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. That hard work and persistence can overcome almost any obstacle. That someone believing in you can change everything. Louis was quiet for several minutes, processing what his father had told him. Finally, he spoke. But Dad, you're killing yourself. 2 jobs at 65 years old. There has to be a better way. Anthony turned to face his son directly. Louis, would you rather die on your feet chasing something meaningful, or live on your knees doing nothing important? The words hit Louis like a physical blow. This was exactly what Anthony had told him when he was 12 and wanted to quit racing after a series of bad races. I'd rather work myself to exhaustion helping kids like Maya and Jamal than spend another day sitting in comfort while children with dreams have no one to help them. Louis understood now. This wasn't about his father being too proud to accept help. This wasn't about Anthony needing to prove himself. This was about a man who had found his life's purpose and refused to give it up, even if it meant working 2 jobs to fund it. Dad, tell me about each of the kids. I want to know about all of them. Anthony's eyes brightened, and for the next hour, he told Louis stories about every child in the academy. There was Maya, whose mother worked as a nurse and dreamed of seeing her daughter break barriers in motorsport. There was Jamal, whose father had left when he was young and who found confidence and male role models through racing. There was Aisha, whose family had immigrated from Somalia and who saw racing as a way to fit into British culture while maintaining her own identity. Each story broke Louis's heart and filled it at the same time. These children faced the same barriers he had faced as a young black racing driver. But they had something he hadn't always had. Someone who believed in them unconditionally from the very beginning that as the sun began to set. Lewis realized this. Conversation wasn't going to end with him convincing his father to retire. Instead, he was starting to form a different plan, one that would honor his father's purpose while ensuring Anthony didn't work himself into an early grave. "Dad," Lewis said as the streetlights began to flicker on, "what if I told you there was a way to help even more kids without you working 2 jobs?" Anthony looked suspicious. "If you're talking about just writing a big check and solving everything with money." "No, not just money. What if we made this official? What if we created a real foundation with proper facilities and equipment? But with you running it, you could reach 10 times as many kids." For the first time since Lewis had arrived, his father looked genuinely interested in what he had to say. "Keep talking," Anthony said, leaning forward slightly. "But remember, Lewis, these kids don't need charity. They need someone who believes in them." Lewis pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. His mind was racing with possibilities. "Dad, what if we bought a proper facility? Not just a garage, but a real training center. We could have multiple go-karts, a classroom for theory lessons, maybe even a small track." Anthony was quiet, thinking. The kids would still get completely free lessons. Completely free. But more than that, we could provide transportation for families who can't drive to lessons. We could help with school programs. We could create partnerships with local racing clubs. Lewis's excitement grew as he talked. "Dad, you've proven in 2 years that there are kids out there with the same hunger I had. What if we could reach hundreds of them instead of just 8 or 10? Anthony stood up and walked to the garden gate, looking down the street where several of his students lived. "You really think we could do that without losing what makes this special?" "I know we could, but only if you're willing to be the heart of it. These kids don't need Lewis Hamilton the celebrity. They need Anthony Hamilton the teacher who believes in them." They talked for another hour as darkness fell around them. Lewis found himself remembering his own childhood when his father would sit with him after races, helping him understand what he had done well and what he could improve. Anthony had never just been a parent cheering from the sidelines. He had been a coach, a mentor, and most importantly, someone who never doubted Lewis could achieve his dreams. "There's something else," Lewis said. "What if we created a scholarship program? Kids who show real talent and passion could get funding for higher levels of racing. We could partner with racing schools across Europe." Anthony's eyes widened. "You mean like a pathway from our program all the way to professional racing?" "Exactly. Dad, you've already proven that kids like Maya and Jamal have incredible potential. What if we could help them develop that potential all the way to the top?" That evening, they drove to Maya's house in a modest neighborhood very similar to where Lewis had grown up. Small terraced houses lined both sides of the street, with cars parked tightly together and tiny front gardens. Sarah Chun answered the door, still wearing her nurse's uniform. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at the local hospital. When she saw Lewis standing beside Anthony, her face showed complete shock. "Oh my goodness, you're Lewis Hamilton." "I'm Anthony's son," Lewis said with a smile. "And I'm here to learn about Maya." Maya came running to the door and stopped short when she saw Lewis. But then she did something that surprised him. She ran past Lewis and hugged Anthony tightly. "Mr. Hamilton, are you here for dinner? Mom made extra shepherd's pie." Lewis watched this interaction with growing understanding. To Maya, Anthony Hamilton was the hero. Lewis was just the famous person she had seen on television. Over dinner, in their small kitchen, Sarah told Lewis about the difference the academy had made in Maya's life. "She's always been a confident girl, but racing has given her something special. She talks constantly about being the first Black British woman to win a Formula One race. Before your father started teaching her, she didn't even know that was possible." Maya nodded enthusiastically, her mouth full of shepherd's pie. "Mr. Hamilton tells us stories about when you were little, Lewis. Did you really crash into tire barriers?" Lewis laughed. "More times than I'd like to admit. Mr. Hamilton says that's how we learn. He says every crash teaches us something important if we pay attention to what went wrong." After dinner, Maya showed Lewis her bedroom, which was covered with pictures of racing cars. But what caught his attention was a hand-drawn poster on her wall. In crayon and marker, she had written, "Maya's Racing Rules," with a list underneath. "Safety first. Always respect other drivers, learn from mistakes, never give up, help other kids learn too. Mr. Hamilton taught me these rules, Maya explained proudly. He says if I follow them, I can become anything I want. Lewis felt tears building in his eyes. These were the same rules Anthony had taught him 30 years ago. As they were leaving Maya's house, Sarah pulled Lewis aside. There's something you should know about your father, she said quietly. Last month, when Maya's grandmother was in the hospital, your dad visited her every day. He brought flowers, sat with her, and made sure our family had everything we needed. Lewis looked back at Anthony, who was saying goodbye to Maya. He's not just teaching these kids to race, Sarah continued. He's becoming like family to all of us. If you take him away from this work, you'll break more hearts than just his. The drive back to Anthony's house was quiet. Lewis processed everything he had seen and heard. His father hadn't just started a racing program. He had built a community of families who depended on him for much more than go-kart lessons. Dad, Lewis said as they pulled into the driveway, I understand now why this means so much to you. Anthony turned off the engine, but didn't get out of the car immediately. Lewis, those children have given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? The feeling that I'm making a difference in the world. When I see Maya's confidence grow, or watch Jamal figure out how to fix an engine problem, or help Aisha overcome her shyness, that's when I feel most alive. Lewis nodded. Dad, what if we could multiply that feeling? What if instead of 8 kids, you could help 80? Or 800? Anthony was quiet for a moment. You really think we could do that? I know we could, but I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll quit those other jobs. Let me fund this properly so you can focus all your energy on the kids. Anthony hesitated. Lewis, I don't want to just take your money. You wouldn't be taking it, Dad. You'd be earning it. You'd be running the foundation, developing the programs, training other instructors. This would be your full-time job, the most important job in the world. Anthony smiled for the first time since Lewis had arrived. A foundation, you said? The Hamilton Foundation. And you would be the director. And we could really help hundreds of kids. Thousands, Dad. We could help thousands. As they walked toward the house, Lewis felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the excitement of working on a project with his father. Not as a famous driver and his proud parent, but as partners with a shared mission. But just as they reached the front door, Lewis's phone buzzed with a message that would change everything about their plans. Lewis looked at the screen and his jaw dropped. The message was from Toto Wolff, his team principal at Mercedes. Lewis, I've been hearing some interesting rumors about what you and your father are doing in Stevenage. Can we talk tomorrow? This could be bigger than you imagine. Lewis showed the message to Anthony, who frowned in confusion. How does Toto know about the academy? I have no idea, Dad. But if Toto Wolff wants to talk about it, something big is happening. They went inside, and Lewis immediately called Toto. Even though it was late evening, his team principal answered on the first ring. Lewis, perfect timing. I've just finished a very interesting phone call. Toto, how do you know about my father's program? Word travels fast in the racing world, my friend. Especially when someone discovers that Anthony Hamilton has been quietly training the next generation of drivers in his garage. Lewis put the phone on speaker so Anthony could hear. But here's what you don't know, Toto continued. Formula One is facing a serious problem. We need more diversity in the sport. We need drivers from different backgrounds, different communities. The sport is too narrow, too expensive, too closed off from regular families. Anthony leaned forward, listening intently. What your father has been doing is exactly what Formula One needs. He's finding talented kids from working-class families and giving them real opportunities. The FIA has been looking for authentic grassroots programs like this for years. Lewis felt his heart racing. What are you saying, Toto? I'm saying Formula One wants to support what you're building. Official support, real funding, technical expertise, a clear pathway from your father's academy all the way to professional racing. Anthony's eyes widened in disbelief. There's a meeting scheduled for next week with the FIA president and team principals from Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren. They want to discuss making your foundation an official partner program. After the call ended, Lewis and Anthony sat in stunned silence in the small living room where Lewis had grown up. Dad, do you understand what this means? Anthony shook his head slowly. I just wanted to help some local kids learn to race. And now you're going to help kids across the entire country, maybe across all of Europe. Over the next few days, Lewis stayed in Stevenage to help prepare for the biggest week of their lives. He watched his father work with the children, taking notes about teaching methods and program structure. He interviewed the parents about what they needed most for their kids. He studied the garage setup to understand how it could be expanded, but, most importantly, he watched Anthony with fresh eyes. His father wasn't just a retired man looking for something to do. He was a natural teacher with a gift for connecting with children and helping them believe in themselves. On Wednesday morning, Maya's mother Sarah called with exciting news. Mr. Hamilton, Maya just won her first official race at the Hertfordshire Youth Karting Championship. She finished ahead of 12 other kids, including some who have been racing for years. Anthony's face lit up with pure joy. That's my girl. I knew she had it in her. Lewis watched his father's reaction and realized something important. Anthony's happiness about Maya's win was exactly the same as his reaction when Lewis had won his first race 30 years ago. The pure, unselfish joy of a teacher watching his students succeed. That afternoon, Lewis received another call, this time from Sebastian Vettel, the recently retired four-time world champion. Lewis, I've been following the story about your father's academy. I want you to know that what he's doing is the most important work in motorsport right now. Sebastian, I appreciate that. But no, listen to me. I spent 15 years in Formula One and I won 4 championships. But your father has already created something more valuable than any trophy. He's proven that talent exists everywhere if someone is willing to look for it and nurture it. Sebastian's voice grew more passionate. I want to help. I want to be part of this foundation. Not as a famous name or a celebrity endorsement, but as someone who believes in the mission. Lewis was amazed. Sebastian, are you sure? Lewis, your father has shown all of us what real legacy looks like. It's not about the races you win. It's about the lives you change. I want my retirement to mean something important. By Friday, Lewis had received similar calls from other racing legends. The Schumacher Family Foundation wanted to partner with them. Niki Lauda's family offered support. Even Ayrton Senna's foundation in Brazil reached out about creating an international program. But the most meaningful moment came Friday evening, when Lewis sat with the original 8 children from the Garage Academy in Anthony's small living room. Jamal raised his hand, just like he was in school. Mr. Hamilton, will all these famous people change how you teach us? Anthony smiled and looked around at each child. Jamal, do you remember what I told you on your first day? That racing is about respecting the car, respecting other drivers, and respecting yourself. Has anything about that changed because some important people want to help us? No, sir. Then nothing important will change. You'll still learn the same lessons, work just as hard, and dream just as big. The only difference is that more kids will get the same chances you've had. Maya spoke up from her spot on the carpet. Mr. Hamilton, does this mean other kids like us will get to learn racing too? That's exactly what it means, Maya. Lots of other kids who love racing but never thought they could afford it. Aisha, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, finally asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Mr. Hamilton, when we grow up and become famous race car drivers, will we remember to help kids the way you helped us? Anthony looked at each child, then at Lewis, before answering. Aisha, the most important lesson you'll ever learn isn't about racing lines or breakpoints. It's about remembering where you came from and helping others follow the path you took. If I've taught you anything, it's that success means nothing unless you use it to lift other people up. Lewis felt tears in his eyes as he watched his father with these children. In that moment, he understood that his father had already achieved something greater than any racing championship. He had created a legacy of hope and opportunity that would continue long after any trophies were forgotten. 2 weeks later, the first official Hamilton Foundation Academy opened its doors in a renovated warehouse in Stevenage. The facility was beautiful, with professional-grade go-karts, a proper racing circuit, and classroom space for 50 children. But the most beautiful moment came when Anthony walked onto the track for the first official lesson. Maya, Jamal, Aisha, and the other original students were there, but now they were joined by 42 new children from across Hertfordshire. Lewis watched from the sidelines as his father did what he did best, believed in children, and taught them to believe in themselves. Welcome to the Hamilton Foundation Academy, Anthony announced to the group of 50 kids. Here, we learn that racing isn't just about going fast. It's about perseverance, respect, and never giving up on your dreams. And most importantly, it's about helping others chase their dreams too. Lewis stood at the edge of the new track, watching his father address the largest group of children he had ever taught. The professional facility was impressive. Proper go-karts lined up in neat rows, safety equipment hanging on organized pegboards, and a real racing circuit with proper barriers and timing equipment. But what moved Lewis most was seeing Maya, Jamal, and Aisha standing proudly at the front of the group, wearing special senior student badges. They had become Anthony's helpers, showing the new children how to check tire pressure and explaining the safety rules. Today we're going to start with the most important lesson, Anthony continued, his voice carrying clearly across the group. Racing is about respect. Respect for your equipment, respect for other drivers, and respect for yourself. A new student, a shy boy who looked about 7 years old, raised his hand. Mr. Hamilton, what if we're not fast enough? Anthony knelt down to the boy's eye level. What's your name, son? Marcus. Well, Marcus, let me tell you something important. Speed isn't about being the fastest person on the track. Real speed comes from being smooth, being smart, and being safe. Some of the best drivers in the world aren't the fastest, they're the smartest. Lewis smiled, remembering his father giving him the exact same advice when he was Marcus's AGE.AS. The lesson progressed. Lewis noticed something remarkable happening. The original 8 students naturally paired up with newer children, becoming mentors themselves. Maya was showing a girl named Zara how to hold the steering wheel properly. Jamal was explaining engine basics to a group of fascinated younger kids. After the formal lesson, Lewis pulled his father aside. Dad, look at what you've created. Those kids aren't just learning to race, they're learning to teach. Anthony beamed with pride. That's the real magic, Lewis. When students become teachers, that's when you know the program works. Over the following months, the Hamilton Foundation Academy grew beyond anything Lewis or Anthony had imagined. They opened a second location in Birmingham, then a third in Manchester. Each new academy was run by local instructors trained by Anthony, but all following the same principles he had developed in his garage. Lewis found himself spending more time in England than Monaco, working alongside his father to expand the program. They developed partnerships with schools, created scholarship programs, and established clear pathways for talented students to advance to higher levels of racing. But the most meaningful moments still happened on Saturday mornings in Stevenage. When Anthony taught the original group of children who had started at All Point one Saturday in June, Lewis arrived at the academy to find Anthony sitting quietly in his office, looking at photographs of students from all 3 locations. Dad, you look tired. Maybe you should take a day off. Anthony shook his head. Lewis, I'm 75 years old, and I've never felt more energetic in my life. Lewis realized his father had celebrated a birthday, but instead of slowing down, Anthony seemed to have found a new level of purpose and energy. There's something I want to show you, Anthony said, opening a folder on his desk. Inside were letters from parents, but not just thank you notes. These were updates about children's lives being transformed by the academy. Read this one, Anthony said, handing Lewis a letter. Dear Mr. Hamilton, I wanted to update you on Maya's progress. She just received a full scholarship to the British Racing School. The instructors said they'd never seen a young driver with such strong fundamentals and such mature attitude. She credits everything to what you taught her about respect and perseverance. She still talks about wanting to be the first Black British woman to win Formula One, but now she also talks about starting her own academy someday to help other kids. You didn't just teach her to race, you taught her to dream big and give back. Lewis felt tears in his eyes. Dad, this is incredible. There's more, Anthony said, showing him another letter. Mr. Hamilton, Jamal has decided he wants to be a racing engineer instead of a driver. He's excelling in mathematics and science at school because racing gave him a practical way to understand these subjects. His teachers say he's like a different child, confident, curious, and helpful to other students. He wants to design race cars that are safer and more efficient. Thank you for showing him that there are many ways to be part of the racing world. Anthony pulled out a third letter, and this one is my favorite. Dear Mr. Hamilton, Aisha wanted me to write this letter because her English is still improving, but she wanted you to know something important. She says the academy didn't just teach her about racing, it taught her about belonging. For the first time since we moved to England, she feels like she has a place where she fits in completely. The other children don't see her as different, they see her as a fellow racer. She's been teaching some of her school friends basic car maintenance, and 3 of them want to join the academy next year. Thank you for giving our daughter confidence and a community. Lewis set down the letters, overwhelmed by the impact his father had created. Dad, you've built something incredible. These kids aren't just learning to race, they're becoming leaders in their communities. Anthony stood up and walked to the window overlooking the track where children were practicing with volunteer instructors. Lewis, do you remember what you asked me when you first found out about the academy? I asked why you were working yourself to death when you could be retired and comfortable, and now you understand. Lewis nodded. You weren't working yourself to death, Dad. You were working yourself to life. That afternoon, Lewis received a phone call that would change everything once again. This time, it was from the Prime Minister's office. Mr. Hamilton, the Prime Minister would like to discuss making the Hamilton Foundation Academy a national program, with government support and expansion to every major city in the UK. Lewis looked at his father, who was outside teaching a group of 10-year-olds how to change spark plugs. Can I call you back? Lewis said, I need to discuss this with my business partner. Anthony wasn't just Lewis's father anymore. He had become his partner in the most important work either of them had ever done. But as Lewis walked outside to tell Anthony about the call, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. His father was moving more slowly than usual, and when he bent down to help a child, it took him a moment longer to stand back up. For the first time since discovering the academy, Lewis felt a familiar worry creeping back into his mind. His father was 75 years old, working harder than most people half his age. How much longer could this incredible energy and passion last? As if reading his thoughts, Anthony looked up and caught Lewis's eye. His father's smile was as bright as ever, but Lewis could see something else in his expression, something that suggested Anthony had been thinking about the same question. That evening, after all the children had gone home, Lewis and Anthony sat in the academy office, reviewing the day's lessons. The government's offer for national expansion lay on the desk between them, but neither man had mentioned it yet. Dad, where have you been going in the mornings? Lewis asked suddenly. Mrs. Chin mentioned she still sees you leaving early, but the academy doesn't open until 10. Anthony's hand froze as he was writing notes about one of the new students. He set down his pen slowly and looked at his son. I was wondering when you'd ask about that. So where do you go? Anthony stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a folder Lewis had never seen before and placed it on the desk. I've been visiting other communities, Lewis. Places like Stevenage where kids might benefit from what we're doing. Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Cardiff. Even some smaller towns you've never heard of. Lewis opened the folder. Inside were business cards, flyers, photographs, and detailed handwritten notes in his father's careful script. Dad, you've been doing market research. I suppose that's what you'd call it. I've been talking to community leaders, visiting schools, meeting with parents. I wanted to understand what each place needs before we try to expand there. Lewis looked through the materials. There were photos of Anthony meeting with parents, talking to children, visiting potential locations for new academies. His father had been working like a professional consultant, mapping out expansion opportunities across the entire country. I've identified 18 communities where we could start programs, Anthony continued. Each one has committed local support. Parents willing to volunteer, businesses ready to sponsor events, community centers offering space. Lewis stared at the detailed notes his father had compiled. Each entry told a story of a different community, different children, different dreams. In Birmingham, I met a girl named Zara whose father drives a taxi 14 hours a day just to pay rent. She's never seen a go-kart in person, but she draws racing cars constantly and knows the names of every Formula One driver. Anthony pulled out a child's drawing from the folder. It showed a stick-figure girl standing beside a race car with Zara, future champion, written in crayon across the top. In Liverpool, there's a boy named Connor whose mother cleans offices at night and works in a cafe during the day. He built a wooden race car in their tiny backyard and pretends he's driving at Silverstone. Lewis saw a photograph of a homemade wooden car, carefully painted with racing stripes and the number 7. There's a community center in Cardiff where 12 kids show up every week hoping someone will teach them about cars. They don't even know go-karting exists, but they're fascinated by anything with wheels and an engine. Anthony sat back down, his voice growing more passionate. Lewis, everywhere I go, I find the same thing. Kids with dreams and parents who want to help but don't know how. Kids who think racing is only for rich families from places like Monaco. Lewis felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Dad, how long have you been doing this research? 6 months. Every morning for 6 months, I've been visiting different communities, talking to families, understanding what they need. Lewis realized what this meant. While he thought his father was finally focusing just on the Stevenage Academy, Anthony had been working even harder, traveling across the country to lay groundwork for massive expansion. But Dad, traveling that much, meeting with all these people, doing all this research, you're 75 years old. When do you rest? Anthony looked directly at Lewis. I rest when I'm dead, son. Right now, I have work to do. The bluntness of his father's words hit Lewis like a physical blow. There's something else, Anthony said quietly. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a medical appointment card. I missed my doctor's appointment again yesterday, the 3rd one this month. Lewis felt his blood run cold. What doctor's appointment? Dad, are you sick? Anthony was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Early-stage Parkinson's disease. Diagnosed 8 months ago. The room seemed to spin around Lewis. He gripped the edge of the desk to steady himself. Parkinson's? Dad, why didn't you tell me? Because I knew exactly what you'd do. You'd make me stop everything. You'd want me to rest, take it easy, focus on my health. Anthony's voice grew stronger. But Lewis, this diagnosis didn't make me want to slow down. It made me realize I have limited time to make a difference. Lewis felt like he couldn't breathe. How long do we have? The doctors don't know exactly. Maybe 5 years before the symptoms become serious. Maybe 10 if I'm lucky and the medication helps. Anthony stood up and walked to the window overlooking the track where so many children had learned to believe in themselves. Lewis, when I got that diagnosis, I went home and thought about what I wanted to do with whatever time I have left. I could sit around feeling sorry for myself, or I could use every day to give more children what I gave you. Lewis stared at his father's back, trying to process what he was hearing. The Garage Academy. You started it after the diagnosis? 3 weeks after. The doctor told me I should consider slowing down, maybe taking up gentle hobbies like gardening or reading. I went home that day and decided I was going to speed up instead. Anthony turned back to Lewis. Do you remember your first championship celebration? You were 9 years old, and after all the trophy presentations and interviews, you came running to me. Lewis nodded, barely trusting his voice. I told you I was going to be world champion someday. And do you remember what I told you? Lewis thought back to that moment. You said that champions aren't made by winning races. They're made by lifting others up. That's right. I told you that your real test as a champion would come when you had the power to change lives. I made you promise that when you became successful, you'd remember where you came from. Anthony walked back to his desk and sat down. But I made myself a promise too, Lewis. I promised that I would never stop being your father, never stop teaching, never stop believing in the power of dreams. When I got the diagnosis, I realized I had a choice. I could let the disease define my remaining years, or I could make those years count for something bigger than myself. Lewis felt tears streaming down his face. Dad, you've been fighting this disease while building academies and helping kids. I haven't been fighting the disease, son. I've been racing against time. Every child I teach, every dream I help nurture, every barrier I help break down, it's all time well spent. The disease will take what it takes, but it can't take away what I've already built. Anthony reached across the desk and took Lewis's hand. Lewis, this foundation isn't just about helping kids learn to race. It's about creating something that will continue long after I'm gone. It's about building a legacy that means more than any trophy you or I could ever win. Lewis looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw something he had missed before. The slight tremor in Anthony's left hand. The way he moved a little more carefully than he used to. The occasional pause before he spoke, as if he had to concentrate harder than before. But he also saw something else. Determination, purpose, and a kind of peace that comes from knowing you're spending your life on something that truly matters. Dad, what do you need from me? Anthony smiled, the same proud smile he had given Lewis after every childhood race. I need you to help me finish what we started, and I need you to promise me that when I can't do this anymore, you'll make sure it continues. Lewis wiped his eyes and looked at his father with new understanding. Everything made sense now. The urgency, the long hours, the refusal to slow down. Anthony wasn't just teaching children to race. He was building something that would outlast his own ability to teach. Dad, of course I promise. But we're going to do this together for as long as possible. Anthony smiled. That's all I wanted to hear. Just then, Lewis's phone buzzed with another message. He almost ignored it, but the sender's name made him gasp. The message was from Karina Schumacher, Michael Schumacher's wife. Lewis, we've been following news about your foundation. Michael always believed in supporting young drivers. We'd like to discuss how the Schumacher family can support your mission. Lewis showed the message to Anthony, who sat down heavily in his chair. The Schumacher family wants to help us. Dad, do you understand what this means? Michael Schumacher is considered the greatest driver of his generation. If his family endorses our foundation, before Lewis could finish his thought, another message arrived. This one was from Vivian Senna, Ayrton Senna's sister, representing the Senna Foundation in Brazil. Then another from the Niki Lauda Family Foundation. Then Sebastian Vettel, offering to become a full-time ambassador for the program. Within 2 hours, racing legends from around the world were reaching out to support the Hamilton Foundation. But the message that moved Lewis most came from an unexpected source, Sir Jackie Stewart, the 3-time world champion who had become a safety advocate in racing. Anthony and Lewis, what you're building reminds me why I fell in love with racing in the first place. It's not about the fame or money. It's about the pure joy of helping someone discover they can do something they never thought possible. Count me in. That evening, as Lewis and Anthony processed the overwhelming response, they decided to visit Maya's house to share the news. When they arrived, they found Maya in her small bedroom, working on homework at a desk covered with racing magazines and photographs. Mr. Hamilton, Lewis, Maya jumped up and hugged them both. Mom, they're here. Sarah appeared in the doorway, still wearing her nurse's uniform after another long shift. How's our future champion doing? Anthony asked, sitting on Maya's bed. I've been thinking about something, Maya said seriously. When I become a famous race car driver, I want to start my own academy too. Just like yours, Mr. Hamilton. I want to help other girls who think they can't race because they don't see anyone who looks like them. Lewis felt his chest tighten with emotion. This 12-year-old girl wasn't just dreaming about personal success. She was already thinking about how to help others. Maya, Anthony said gently, what if I told you that you don't have to wait until you're famous to start helping other people? Maya's eyes widened. What do you mean? What if you could start helping other kids right now? You could be a mentor to the younger students, teach them what you've learned. Maya's face lit up. Really? I could be a teacher like you. The best teachers are often the ones who remember what it felt like to be a student. As they talked, Lewis realized something profound was happening. Anthony wasn't just creating drivers or engineers. He was creating a generation of young people who understood that success meant lifting others up. The next morning, Lewis received a call that would change everything about the foundation's future. It was from the Secretary of State for Education. Mr. Hamilton, the Prime Minister has asked me to discuss integrating the Hamilton Foundation Academy model into the national curriculum. We want to create automotive education programs in schools across the country, using your father's teaching methods. Lewis looked at Anthony, who was outside teaching a group of 8-year-olds how to check brake fluid. Can I call you back in an hour? I need to discuss this with my partner. Of course. But Mr. Hamilton, I want you to know that what your father has created is being studied by education experts around the world. His combination of technical skills, character development, and community building is exactly what we need in modern education. After the call, Lewis walked outside to watch his father work. Anthony was kneeling beside a young boy who was struggling to remove a spark plug. Instead of doing it for him, Anthony guided the child's hands, showing him the right technique while praising his effort. Remember, Connor, Anthony was saying, the tool should feel like an extension of your hand. Don't force it, let it do the work. When Connor successfully removed the spark plug, his face broke into a huge grin. I did it, Mr. Hamilton. I really did it. You absolutely did. And you know what that means. What? It means you're ready to teach someone else how to do it. Lewis watched this interaction and understood why governments and racing legends were all interested in what Anthony had built. This wasn't just a racing program. It was a model for education that worked. That afternoon, they received visitors that surprised everyone. Toto Wolff arrived at the academy with representatives from Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren. Behind them were television cameras and reporters. Anthony, Toto said as he got out of his car, we've come to see the future of Formula One. The team. Principal spent 3 hours at the academy, watching lessons, talking to children, and interviewing parents. Lewis watched their faces as they realized what they were seeing. Not just talented kids learning to race, but a complete system for developing character, confidence, and community. But the most powerful moment came when Jamal, now 13 and one of Anthony's senior students, was asked what he had learned at the academy. Mr. Hamilton taught me that being good at something isn't enough, Jamal said confidently. You have to use what you're good at to help other people. That's what makes you a real champion. After the visitors left, Lewis found Anthony sitting quietly in his office, looking exhausted but happy. Dad, do you realize what just happened? Formula One wants to make your teaching methods part of their official youth development program. The government wants to put your curriculum in schools. Racing legends want to support us. You've created something that's changing the sport itself. Anthony looked at the photos of his students covering the office walls. Lewis, I have to tell you something I've been thinking about. What's that? All of this attention, all these important people wanting to help, it's wonderful. But the most important thing that happened today was watching Connor learn to remove that spark plug. Lewis didn't understand. Dad, what do you mean? I mean that in 50 years, when Connor is my age, he'll remember the moment he realized he could figure out how things work. He'll remember feeling capable and confident. And maybe, if we're lucky, he'll remember that someone believed in him. Anthony stood up and walked to the window. That's what real success looks like, Lewis. Not the trophies or the recognition or the important people wanting to meet you. Real success is the moment a child discovers they're capable of more than they thought possible. Lewis felt tears in his eyes as he understood what his father was really saying. All the expansion, all the partnerships, all the recognition was all meaningful only if it led to more moments like Connor's breakthrough. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. What's that? You're the greatest champion I've ever known. Anthony turned from the window, his eyes bright with unshed tears. For a moment, father and son simply looked at each other, understanding passing between them without words. Lewis, Anthony said softly, there's one more thing I need to tell you. The real reason I started all of this. Lewis felt his heart skip. After everything they'd shared, what could his father possibly have left to reveal? Anthony walked to his desk and pulled out a worn photograph from the bottom drawer. It showed 8-year-old Lewis standing beside his go-kart after his first race win, beaming with joy as Anthony lifted him onto his shoulders. Do you remember what you said to me that day? Lewis studied the photograph, remembering. I said I was going to be world champion someday, and that I'd make you proud. And what did I say back? Lewis thought harder. You said that making you proud wasn't enough. That I had to promise to help other kids who dreamed like I dreamed. Anthony nodded. I made you promise that when you became successful, you'd remember the kids who didn't get chances. You promised me that day that you'd find a way to give back. Lewis felt a chill of understanding. Dad, are you saying? I'm saying that everything I've done, the Garage Academy, the foundation, working 2 jobs to fund it, I've been keeping your promise. Lewis stared at his father in amazement. You mean this was always about me keeping my word? Anthony shook his head. No, son. This was about me showing you how to keep your word. You've been so focused on taking care of me financially that you forgot about the promise you made that 8-year-old boy who wanted to help other kids. The truth hit Lewis like a thunderbolt. His father hadn't started the academy because he was bored or needed purpose. He'd started it to show Lewis what keeping promises looked like in action. When I got the Parkinson's diagnosis, Anthony continued, I realized I might not have enough time to wait for you to remember that promise on your own. So I decided to start the work myself, hoping you'd eventually want to join me. Lewis sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the depth of his father's planning. And love. Dad, you've been teaching me this whole time, haven't you? Not just about the foundation, but about what it means to be a champion. Lewis, you've won 7 world championships. You're one of the greatest drivers in history. But the championship, that matters most. The one that will define your real legacy. That's the one you win by helping others achieve their dreams. Anthony moved slowly to a filing cabinet and pulled out another folder. This one was thicker than all the others. I've been working with doctors and lawyers for months, creating a succession plan. When my symptoms get worse, when I can't teach anymore, everything is already set up for you to take over. Lewis opened the folder and found detailed plans for the foundation's future. Sarah, Maya's mother, was training to become a program coordinator. Pete from the auto parts store wanted to become a full-time instructor. Several parents had volunteered to handle administration. Most importantly, the original 8 students had committed to becoming junior instructors, passing on what they'd learned to younger children. But Dad, what about your treatment? What about fighting the disease? Anthony sat down beside his son. Lewis, I am fighting it. Every day, I teach a child something new. Every time I help a young person believe in themselves, every moment I spend building something that will last. That's how I fight it. Anthony's voice grew stronger. The disease will take my coordination, my balance, maybe even my ability to speak clearly. But it can't take away what I've already built. It can't undo the confidence I've given to Maya or the skills I've taught Jamal or the dreams I've helped plant in dozens of children. Lewis looked through the succession plans, seeing how carefully his father had thought through every detail. There's something else, Anthony said, pulling out a letter with Lewis's name on it. I wrote this 6 months ago, but I was hoping I wouldn't need to give it to you yet. Lewis opened the letter with shaking hands. My dear son, it began, if you're reading this, it means my symptoms have progressed to the point where I can no longer run the academy effectively. Please don't be sad about this. Be proud of what we've accomplished together, that you've always asked me what I want my legacy to be. I want you to know that my legacy isn't the academy or the foundation or even the children we've helped. My legacy is you, not Lewis Hamilton the driver, but Lewis Hamilton the man who remembers where he came from and helps others rise. The promise you made as an 8-year-old boy wasn't just words. It was a commitment to use your success to lift others up. The Hamilton Foundation is how you keep that promise that I won't be able to teach forever, but you can. And someday Maya will teach, and Jamal will teach, and all the children we've helped will help others in return. That's how promises are kept across generations, that I'm not afraid of what's coming, Lewis, because I know that everything important will continue through you. You are my greatest achievement, not because of the races you've won, but because of the man you've become. Keep the promise, son. Keep helping kids believe in impossible dreams. With all my love and pride, Dad. Lewis wiped away tears as he finished reading. When he looked up, Anthony was watching him with the same expression he'd worn when Lewis won his first championship. Dad, I understand now. This was never about you needing something to do. This was about you showing me what I was supposed to do. Anthony nodded. Lewis, you've spent 15 years racing against other drivers. Now it's time to race against something bigger, against the idea that where you're born determines how far you can go. Lewis stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the track where children were practicing under the lights. Even though it was evening, volunteer instructors were working with kids whose parents could only bring them after work hours. Dad, what happens now? Now we keep building. We open those 18 new academies. We train more instructors. We help more children. And when I can't do this anymore, you keep going. Lewis turned back to his father. What if I'm not as good at this as you are? Anthony smiled the same encouraging smile he'd given Lewis before every childhood race. Lewis, you already are good at this. You just didn't know it yet. Today, when you watched me teach Connor how to remove that spark plug, you weren't just observing. You were learning how to be the teacher these kids will need. Anthony stood up slowly, using the desk for support. Besides, you won't be doing this alone. Maya will help you. So will Jamal and Aisha and all the others. That's the beautiful thing about what we've built. It's bigger than any one person now. Lewis felt a sense of peace settling over him. The anxiety and worry that had brought him to Stevenage were gone, replaced by clarity about his true purpose. Dad, there's something I want you to know. What's that? Finding out about the academy, understanding what you've been doing, working with these kids, it's been the most important thing I've ever done. More important than any race I've ever won. Anthony's face glowed with pride. Lewis, that 8-year-old boy who promised to help other kids? He just became a man. As the lights of the academy track illuminated the evening darkness, Lewis Hamilton finally understood what it meant to be a real champion. It wasn't about crossing finish lines first. It was about helping others believe they could cross finish lines they never thought they'd reach. The promise was revealed, and now it was time to keep it. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. It's amazing to connect with people from all around the world who believe in the power of kindness and giving back. If this story touched your heart and inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up. Your likes help us reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our inspiring content. We share stories of real people doing extraordinary things to make the world a better place. Most importantly, please share this video with your friends and family. Stories like Anthony and Lewis Hamilton's remind us that we all have the power to change lives, no matter where we come from or what challenges we face. By sharing this story, you're helping spread kindness and awareness about the importance of believing in others and giving back to our communities. Thank you for listening. And remember, like Anthony Hamilton taught his students, we never give up on our dreams, and we always help others chase theirs. Until next time, keep inspiring and keep believing.